everybody that's listening. My name is Mark Doolin, and I'm live with Ray Mase. Good to see you, Ray.
Nice to see you.
Great.
Thanks for having me, Mark. Appreciate it.
Oh,
Thank you.
oh, it was a pleasure. And I know that there's a lot of people watching that are really excited. Actually, I know the entire University of Alabama trumpet studio got out of class early to watch. so,
Perfect.
so
I got them out of class. I'm glad
yeah,
to do it.
yeah, exactly. So I'll get your picture back here in just a second. There we go. I don't know where you went. Um, oh, there's a lot of people signing on. Sorry about this.
You're looking
And
for me, huh?
I think, yeah, well, let's see if I can do, nope, that's not going to work. Sorry about this. Well, we can start talking anyway. I think there'll be people coming in for a little bit. So I wanted to ask you a couple questions to start off with, especially about your beginnings, because I know that your father started you. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. So I grew up in Connecticut, Meriden, Connecticut. It's like a town of about 50,000 people. And yeah, my dad was basically an amateur trumpeter. He played. He was a bugler after the First World War. He was a bugler in the army. He was a trumpeter, played club dates. He taught the drum corps. So he was, but he was, he was not a professional player or anything. But he did started me young. I was 5 when I started. I kind of have vague memories of certain things about, learning the lines and spaces and things. For some reason, I have a memory of that. But he was my first teacher, and he was my teacher for a while. I came up through the school system kind of the same as everyone would, let's say. I was a little more advanced by the time I was in 4th grade in the band program when it started. I had played for a while.
Hold on, Ray, 1 second. If you come in, can you guys mute yourselves? That would be great. Got you, Ray. There we go. I think you got muted. I'm so sorry. Do you see it? There we go. Got you.
Okay.
Perfect.
So
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, you're back.
Yeah. So I was saying, I went through the school system, the same as anyone else. I was maybe a little more advanced because I had started so young, but I don't think I was. I wasn't out, working or anything when I was in grade school or junior high or anything like that. And then when I got to high school, I guess 9th grade, I started to study with Roger Murtha up at the Hart School. We were about 20 miles from Hartford, and that was great because I really had much more formal training then. Studying with my father, we didn't have like a lesson a week or anything like that. It was nothing like that. He would kind of step in now and then to say, you ought to try it this way, but he kind of left me on my own, which I think was good. He never argued about my playing the trumpet or anything like that. It was a good thing.
I remember I did a survey about years ago about how people practice the Arvin book, and I think you came back with like age 7 or something. Was like when you started playing Arvin or something like that.
Well, it was for my dad, who was an older player already, if you know what I mean. Arvin was Arvin. It was the Bible, right. And he bought me an Arvin book. As a matter of fact, I still have it. It's absolutely falling apart, but bought me an Arvin book. I think it was probably the first book I had, even though it's not really a beginner's book. But I had an Arvin book. It was $5 then. I don't know how long it stayed $5, but when I was a kid, it was $5.
Wow, that's funny. But I just remember seeing the age of like 7. I went, well, that explains a couple things. So, and then you started working with Roger Murtha. You remember sort of some things about that?
Yeah. Actually, let me see. My junior high school band director had gone to Hart College. And he was very active in the community. He ran a dance band that did concerts in town and stuff. And so when I was in 7th and 8th grade, he started to plant the seed that, well, you should go study with this guy in Hartford. He knew Roger very well and kind of set me up to play for him. And it was a great program. I mean, I wasn't thinking about a program like that at the time, but I'd go up one day a week for my lesson, but then Saturdays we had orchestra in the afternoon, had for a while wind ensemble in the morning, played in a quintet. I mean, I really had high level training. I kind of almost by dumb luck it happened. I wasn't seeking a different kind of education. I just sort of fell into it. So that was really good for me. I think really opened my eyes to a lot of things I hadn't seen before.
Wow. And then And still, while you're young, I remember you and I talked once, and there was some story about you buying a Schilke E flat. Could
Yeah,
you tell that story?
I'm happy to tell that story. I've told it many times. So let me see. I was a junior in high school, and I had been working on the Haydn Concerto, and I was going to be playing it with the Meriden Symphony, the local orchestra. And like everybody else, I started on the B flat trumpet and limited success, just like everybody else at that age. And but my teacher, Mr. Murtha, had a Getzen E flat trumpet, like a short bell trumpet. I don't even know if they're still around, but he lent it to me, and I had pretty good success playing it. And I was working on it, and my dad said, we should go buy you an E flat trumpet. If you're going to play it, rather than borrowing your teachers, we should get something that you can use. So those were the days of Giardinelli's in New York, where I don't know if your listeners know about Giardinelli's, but let's say starting in the 1960s all the way through to the 1990s, Giardinelli's was the brass shop in New York City. Bob Giardinelli was like a brass techie guy. He did repairs, made mouthpieces. It was a great place. When I went down in high school, it was a tiny upstairs shop on West 52nd Street. Four people worked there. Bob Giardinelli, his sister-in-law, who was the secretary, his brother-in-law, who was sort of the shop manager, and one repair person. So anyway, we made the trip to New York. I tried some E-flat trumpets, and among these E-flat trumpets was this Schilke E3L. At the time, I had no idea that the Schilke E3L had only arrived in the shop like 2 days before that. But I played all the trumpets as best I could, and said to my dad, "Well, this is the best trumpet. I think this is the trumpet we should buy." So he starts talking to Giardinelli. Giardinelli seemed a little confused about selling the trumpet. He didn't understand. He said, "Well, let me see if I can figure out what the price is on this trumpet and this and that." Well, lo and behold, I buy the Schilke E3L, and apparently, like a week later, so I go back to Connecticut. A week later, Giardinelli gets a call from Schilke, who says, "Well, what's the word on the E3L? Are people excited about it?" And he said, "Oh, well, actually, I've sold it." And Schilke said, "You sold it?" He said, "Well, yeah." I said, "Oh, did Vacchiano buy it?" And he said, "Well, no. As a matter of fact, I sold it to a high school kid up in Connecticut." So Schilke was not very happy that this had happened. The reason he sent the prototype was for people to get excited about it, and now the horn was gone. Well, it was probably 5 years later, actually probably longer, probably about 7 years later. I was in the American Brass Quintet, and we were playing at an ITG somewhere, and we were playing, I don't know, something, and I was playing on that trumpet. And who happened to be in the audience but Reynolds Schilke? So after the concert, Schilke comes up, and he said, "Can I get a look at that trumpet?" And I said, "Sure." I'm showing him the trumpet, and he's looking at it. He's looking at me, and he said, "Are you the original owner of this trumpet?" I said, "Yes, as a matter of fact, I am." He said, "Were you a high school kid in Connecticut when you bought this trumpet?" And I said, "Yes, I was." So we had a very nice conversation about it, but he told me the whole deal of, that he had expected that the trumpet would be around New York for a while and get a lot of interest, but just like that, it was gone. So I just got lucky. I happened in the shop, and there it was, and that's the trumpet I bought.
Amazing. Is that the same E flat you played all those years in the quintet? And
I let me see. Eventually, I bought another, so I have two E3Ls. But that one, I mean, I still have that one, and I still played it in my career. As a matter of fact, that trumpet probably played the chocolate solo in the Nutcracker over 1,000 times.
I
I ended
was
up doing, I don't know, 1,200 Nutcrackers. I never quite kept track, but that was my go-to trumpet for that passage, and it sat in my locker at the theater, and it served me well. It got me through those Nutcrackers, so that was a good thing.
I was curious about how many Nutcrackers you played. So
Yeah. There's
and
a dog,
just
just like you
and
said it
just
might happen.
and just like I said, it might happen. I don't know what he's barking at, but there's nobody here. Um, so growing up, who were you listening to?
Yeah, actually, I listened a lot. I sort of thought about this a little bit. I knew you were going to ask this question, and so of course, when I was a kid, the only real way you heard players was through LPs. There was no internet, obviously. Concerts were not easy to get to. There weren't that many. I was in smaller town in Connecticut, but I had LPs of when I was young. I had Mendez, I had Severinsen, Louis Armstrong. My father loved Louis Armstrong. Maurice Andre some. Eventually, I got into Miles Davis. I played a lot of pop music, so I listened to Al Hurt and Herb Alpert a lot, and of course Maynard. Geez, in later in high school was when Don Ellis was a
Hmm.
big name, and Bill Chase started playing. I eventually had a chance to see both of them live when I was in college. But yeah, I listened to a lot of different things. There was no, I was not well directed in terms of, well, this is what I'm going to do and this is what I'm going to be. Um, I mean, for me in high school, I mean, I guess I'd even go so far as to say what drew me to music was just how much fun I had, how many things I was doing. In high school, I played a lot of gigs. I played in a lot of bands, played a lot of wedding bands, polka band, played in a soul band. I played a lot of clubs, and you know, as a high school kid, a lot of times my dad would go with me because you know I was maybe 15, 16, and I was playing with people a lot older than me, and he would sort of tag along and sit and have you know beer in the bar, and I'd be playing. But I have to say, as you know, a 16-year-old kid, that's pretty exciting. You know, that's pretty. You're seeing a lot of life that you're not going to see until you're 25, maybe, you know, or something. You know what I mean? So it was. It, it was very. That's what drew me to music. I
Were
did a
you
lot of things. Yeah.
were you improvising and playing?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I was. I mean, I don't know if I would ever say I was you know really accomplished, but for the type of gigs I was playing, yeah, I was an improviser. A couple of the bands I played in, I wrote tunes. Some that were we played a lot, some that seemed popular. So I don't know. I got used to just a lot of different things, a lot of different music, and I guess I guess fortunately, being at Hart, which started you know sort of ninth grade, my Saturdays were pretty straight and narrow. I mean, I was at a conservatory-oriented place with very serious young students, and I think that that made me start to think more seriously about a career in music. Because up until that point, I think music was just a really good time for me. I loved
Right.
doing it, but I also was, you know, I was so independent. But through music, I became so independent as a young man, and that was great. That was really really cool.
Now, was there ever like a moment when you were a young student that you said, "This is definitely what I want to do," and you'd made up your mind? Or was it sort of an organic kind of?
Well, I would say by ninth grade, or maybe starting in ninth grade, uh, I was quite serious about it. I mean, I really did practice. I mean, before that, you know, I practiced and I was interested, but I wasn't, you know, I wasn't that motivated or I wasn't that serious about it. But in ninth grade, I started to play more. I started more things to do. Started playing more groups, which again, the social part of it was great. And I started to think this could be a good thing. This could be something that I want to do. And I think it's probably 10th grade that I very casually sort of announced to my dad, you know, I says, you know, I think I'm going to go into music. And, you know, I mean, I didn't think about, you know, Dad, we're going to have a serious conversation. It was
Yeah.
nothing like that. I just kind of very casually. And I remember it because he was so, my dad was the oldest boy in a family, an Italian immigrant family with 10 children. My dad's education was stopped in the seventh grade. He had to go to work to help the family. To my father, the idea of someone coming up in the United States as a young person, like I mean, remember that conversation. He said, "You know, Ray, you have good grades. You could be a doctor. You could be a lawyer. You could do something with yourself. Why would you possibly want to be a musician?" But of course, to him, being a musician was going to be I was going to play club dates every Saturday night. You know, I was going to play
Yeah.
in bars. That's what he did as a musician, more or less, and. He didn't really wasn't thinking about the field. He didn't know about the field. So fortunately, he didn't say under no circumstances you're not going
Yeah.
to do this. You know, he didn't say that at all. But clearly, he didn't really have a great deal of knowledge of what it meant to be a professional musician. And although he never said it to me, something tells me that he had a conversation with Roger Murtha, and I think Roger probably said, you know, your son's doing well, and there's a life out there in music. If he wants to kind of pursue it, he's got a good shot. So I expect that that happened because my dad never really said, "I don't want you to do this," or "I think you're making bad judgment." He supported me, and that was great. That was
Right.
you know, it's. I mean, you want to have the support of your parents. Everyone does, I think. So you know, you want to make that happen.
Yeah. Absolutely. And after that, you went to NEC and you studied with Armando Gatala.
Yeah, that's right. Guttala had been Roger Murtha's teacher. They were actually very good friends, and it was a sort of a logical transition for me. I only applied to NEC and Juilliard. I never even ended up playing the audition for Juilliard because I auditioned at NEC and I was accepted. And my teacher said, "Well, you could study with Guitar. I think it'd be a great situation." I said, "Fine, that's where I'll go." Um, Times were different then.
Yeah.
Now you can find out so much so quickly. But basically, NEC seemed like a nice place. I liked the teacher, and that's where I ended up. I started there and kept going there.
Now, I know Mr. Catala was very into setting people up with their fundamentals. Can you kind of talk about things he would assign or things you would work through to deal with that?
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head that fundamentals were a very big part of his training. I wouldn't say, um, I mean, I don't recall that I played, I didn't play like the first Clark study for him regularly or anything like that, or I didn't play literally long tones and stuff, but a lot of etudes. A big part of the study with Catala was etudes, a lot of different etudes, and transposition was a big part of it. And I think repertoire, in a lot of ways, I generated the repertoire. In a lot of
Hmm.
ways, I brought things in that either I was doing, had to do, or I was interested in, which he was very, receptive. He was very happy to help me with things. Um, but he didn't say, you need to know this piece or you need to, not really. He was more, and as I said, I mean, I had him for 4 years and I really did so much etude material. But the concept, if you learn how to play the instrument, you can play repertoire. And
Yeah.
if you don't learn how to play the instrument, don't think about playing repertoire because you're not going to be able to. And I think that's, I learned a lot from that. I learned a lot, actually, a couple other things about with him. I remember when I first went off to school, like a lot of young people, I thought that there were a lot of sort of secrets or magic that the big artists had that I didn't, and that I would need to know about. I would be given this sort of, it would be passed on to me like this is the secret, because everyone seemed to be so adept and so comfortable playing. If I watched, every now and then an orchestra would be on TV, and everybody seemed to do so well. And I remember thinking, they must know something about playing that I don't know. And the thing I learned from Guitar, which was really important for me, is I started I would see him weekly, and another student said to me, so you'll be able to tell how Guitar is doing a certain week by what's on the programs. So look at the Boston Symphony program, and if it's an easy week, he'll be very gregarious and outgoing and comfortable. But if it's a really hard week, you'll notice that he's not quite himself. He's not quite as comfortable. I started paying attention, and I realized it was absolutely true that
Wow.
he was very very serious about his job. He's a very serious guy, and I realized with that, he has the same. These high level professional musicians have the same sort of concerns and the same challenges that I had. They're at a different stage in their life, and they're clearly at a different level, but it's not going to be different. This is what it's like. You have to learn to deal with these things, and everybody has those problems. That was a big realization for me. That was important. I didn't feel like, well, I'm not going to be able to do this. Other people can do it, but I'm not going to be able to do it. I didn't feel that anymore. I felt like, no, I have to figure it out. And I guess uh, one of the best things he ever said to me. So I had been out of school, 5 or 8 years, something like that, and I took on a year with something called toccatas and flourishes. You're nodding like you
I
probably know
know.
what that
Yeah.
is. Yeah, okay, so
I
not
know
too
what
many
that is.
people would know. Yeah, so for your listeners, your viewers, toccatas and flourishes was a trumpet and organ duo. It started somewhere around 1970, I believe, with Martin Barenbaum was the trumpeter, and these two guys it was a wonderful program. It was very engaging. It's very kind of user friendly or audience friendly. They did a lot of concerts. They had Columbia Artist Management, and Marty left the program, I guess, 1979. So the year I did it, if I remember, it was 1980. So I got this job in Toccatas and Flourishes, and It was 40 recitals. It was a lot. 40 recitals in a year is a lot of recitals to play. And, part of me said, well, I was busy in New York and obviously I had the quintet. I looked at the schedule and I said, if I'm ever going to really find out what it's like to be a soloist and whether that's a calling for me, whether it's something I can do, this is the perfect way to do it. Go out on the road and play 40 recitals. You couldn't have asked for a better situation. Well, after about the first month or 2 months, I had maybe done a dozen recitals. I remember that I didn't enjoy it very much. I was doing okay. I thought I played well. I played the recitals well. I didn't like being by myself on the road, which most of the time I was.
Hmm.
We traveled in we had to bring an instrument because most of the places we played didn't have an instrument. We played in high school auditoriums and things. Columbia
Right.
Artist Management was a community concert series. So we traveled in an RV with an organ and a trailer on the back. The organist, his manager, roadie guy, and me. And when we'd get to a town, basically they'd drop me at the Holiday Inn. They'd go to high school, set up the instrument. He'd practice. I'd show up at 6:30. We'd play a recital. I'd go back. They'd pick me up in the morning. Uh, I did not dig being sort of on my own at a Holiday Inn on the road somewhere day after day. But I'm sorry, it's a long intro to
No,
this,
no,
but
no, but
it
that's
is.
fine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, this leads. So I remember after doing it for a while, and I was very torn, thinking, I should be. This should be important to me. This is such an opportunity. So I called Gatala. We had a conversation, and I said, I just don't know that this is for me. And before I sort of stop doing this, or just do this year, what's wrong with me? What's going on in my head? What is this about? And his response is, he said something like, he said, Ray, there are musicians out there who the only time they feel comfortable with themselves is when they're on the stage performing. And the rest of the time is just a holding period until they do that again. And you're not one of those people. That's what he said to me. And boy, did that hit home. I remember thinking, he's right. It isn't this standing up and playing this recital and sort of, being out of town and away from people that I want to be with didn't do it. It just didn't sort of do it for me. But he really put it in perspective for me, which was at that moment, really, really important.
Yeah.
I don't know what my life would have been had I decided to stay with that. Obviously, I would have done much less in New York. Maybe I would have left the quintet. I don't know had I decided to do that. But I think fortunately for me, he supported me in a certain way, and that meant a lot to me. It really, really helped me through it.
Yeah. Is that doesn't Toccatas and Flourishes, does that still exist?
I don't think so. The organist is a guy named Richard Morris, who was, I want to say he had to have been 15 years older than me. He had
Right.
to have been. And so, I was maybe close to 30 then, and I'm sure he was 40 anyway. So I
Yeah.
would be surprised. But they went on after me. Scott Thornburg did it after me. Bob Sullivan did it for a
Right.
while. Maybe even Mark Inouye. I can't quite remember.
I think that
But
sounds right.
there were some other players that did it. It was kind of a kick in a way. To stand up and play recitals. Usually do one and you're done. One and done. That's it.
Yeah.
And you just look back kind of like, well, I could have done that better. Or this was okay. You really have no picking up the pieces kind of thing. But when you do it over and over, I mean, I remember it because after just a few, I didn't need music anymore. I was playing from memory, and I was literally just standing in front, playing, sort of oblivious. I was so engaged by what I was doing in front of people. In that respect, it was great. It was the only way you can feel that comfortable is if you're doing it all the time.
Right.
Do it over and over, and then you can just stand up and do it, and you're kind of oblivious to there's so and so, and this is this, and all that goes away if you do it frequently enough.
40 times in 1 year is enough recitals.
Yeah, yeah, it was good. Yeah, there's a lot.
So, I want to talk a little bit about too, because obviously, you had American Brass Quintet in 1973,
Mhm.
and in that group, did you already have an interest in early music, or is that something you sort of brought to the group?
Actually, I did have an interest in early music by the time I got there, and in college, I learned the Baroque trumpet and the cornetto. I don't wouldn't say I was particularly good at either of them, but it was a time when kind of nobody was doing it. And it's sort of funny how that happened. My sophomore year, there was a guy, a graduate student who was a trumpeter but played cornetto at NEC, and he approached me and said, the Gunther Schuller, who was the president of New England Conservatory then, is writing a piece for the Boston Symphony to play, which will be in celebration of the 150th year anniversary of the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. The piece is going to have a dozen Renaissance instruments as soloists with the Boston Symphony. And it was going to be called Museum Piece, 2 cornettos. So he said, would you have any interest in trying to, learn the cornetto and learn this to play this piece? I was like, sure, yeah. Where do I get it? Let me try it. So I got this instrument, and I learned to play Gunther Schuller's Museum Piece on the cornetto, and frankly, I could barely play a scale on it. But I learned the fingerings of the notes in that piece, and I could play that piece. I just decided I can do this. I can make this work. Once we were done with that, I remember this guy's name was Dick Cook. I remember Dick saying, well, you should keep doing this. We should start to have, the trombone guys, it's much easier for them to learn sax, but a couple of guys were interested. So we started a group. And so I gradually learned cornetto then. I was also doing some Baroque trumpet. And when I got to New York is when I got friendly with Alan Dean, and some of the nicest times we played a lot of things together, but some of the nicest times we had, or fun times, was with the New York Cornet and Sackbut Ensemble, where we were the 2 cornetto players, and we played with 4 sackbuts, and that was very, very enjoyable times. But so anyway, I did have some early music experience. Also, the American Brass Quintet was playing early music before I got there, certainly. Jerry Schwartz was my predecessor in the quintet, and he had a lot of experience in a lot of things. He was, a very proficient player and very fine musician. So the group was used to playing, editions of early music. They played, I remember, Holborn's Suite, Scheidt Battle Galliard, Suite by Shine, some Josquin pieces, actually Stolzer fantasies. There was a pretty good wealth of stuff. The tenor trombone player in the group, when it started, was a guy named Arnold Fromm, who was part of the New York Pro Musica, so he was a sackbut player. He knew a lot of early music, and he brought a lot of things in as well. Certainly, once I got in the quintet and started to kind of, function, be able to sort of, call some shots a little bit or bring some things in. I did a lot over the years. It was kind of a very regular, twice a year, 3 times a year, I'd be bringing in a new set of pieces or something. So I did a lot of things, but I did have some experience then before.
Well, and if people don't know about your editions that you published through Balkwitter, those are excellent editions. Everybody should know those. I'm sure if you go online, I'm not sure if they're still with Balkwitter or Carl Fisher, but they're.
Balkwitter has just reached a kind of an agreement with Carl Fisher. So all of his, that's Rob McGregor's company, all of it will go to Carl Fisher. I also did 6 or 8 with Dave Hickman's company, which were later editions. And I did some before Balkwitter with Medici music. So there's a pretty good amount of stuff out there. But I did it, and the publishing were not particularly important to me. It was the group playing them, and that was fun. Yeah, that was the reason to do it. Yeah.
I was so glad you did those, because a lot of that stuff's on Fire and Lightning on that recording, and it's so fun to play those pieces, and they're so well done, and obviously written by a trumpet player who understands that's not the only piece on the gig.
That always meant something to me. Yes.
And also obviously early music's a component of the ABQ, but also new composers. So I wanted to see if you could kind of speak to that a little bit, and maybe talk about how a few of these works evolved and how that went.
I guess the first big work that I encountered, which in some ways was very, very important for the American Brass Quintet, was the Brass Quintet of Elliott Carter. Kind of to just for a moment talk about the mission of the quintet. The ABQ, when it was founded in 1960, started right out with this kind of mission that it was going to be a concertizing group. It was going to play on stages that would have the Juilliard String Quartet or, famous Beaux-Arts trio or somebody. It was not going to be a kind of play gigs. It wasn't going to be to play for events. It was going to be a serious concertizing group. And that's what the group was. That's what it started out, and that's what the group has always been. So in the first, I joined the group in the 13th year, I guess, of its existence. And for the first 10, 12 years, a lot of pieces were written, some very good ones, some very important pieces. But there was always this feeling that to really get on the map, the quintet would have to be able to get a piece from, really one of the, the finest or most revered composers of our time. Elliott Carter at that time was certainly considered by many to kind of be the dean of American composers, and largely through the work of Jerry Schwartz, he agreed to write the piece for the quintet. So it was the summer of 1974 that the piece was being written. He was out in Aspen with us and basically wrote sort of little passages in the piece, little segments of the piece, would bring them into rehearsal. We'd tell him why it was okay or why it wasn't. We'd rehearse a little bit. Next week he'd bring some more. By the time the end of the summer came around, he sort of connected it all into one piece as he wanted it. And then we played the premiere we played it for the BBC in London in early October, played it at the Library of Congress in November. So that was a huge thing for the quintet. I actually have another aside. You have to tell me if there's too many asides, because
no.
When you get older, this is what happens: is you go off and you talk. But anyway, well, this is a good one. Recently, a guy got in touch with me. In 1974 in New York, there was a premiere of an Oliver Messiaen piece called "From the Canyons to the Stars." This is a very significant Messiaen piece.
Mm-hmm.
It's premiered in New York, and this person is researching the piece. And he got a copy of a program from Lincoln Center Archives, and he saw my name. So he knows me through Juilliard. He got in touch, and he said, what can you tell me about this piece? You were in the premiere. I want to know what it was like working with Messiaen and all these things. I said, well, I don't remember a lot, but let me see what I can find out. Well, believe it or not, I went in my basement. This is my 1974 Week at a Glance date book. It happens to be on my desk, because I found the date book. I went, and what I said to this guy, I said, well, one thing I remember were a lot of rehearsals. I went in my date book, I gave him the dates and times for 12 rehearsals, 12 three-hour rehearsals we had for the Messiaen. Of course, we're laughing, I'm talking to him, and we're laughing back and forth. Yeah. Like he said, you really found your date book? I said, well, yeah, I keep all my date books. Doesn't everybody? So, but anyway, the reason I bring it up is because when I had looked in there, during the run of this Messiaen piece, I see a Friday night, a Friday where we did the Messiaen from 9 to 12 in the morning. We flew to Washington, D.C., and that night we premiered, it was the U.S. premiere of the Elliott Carter Quintet at the Library of Congress, and we had a 9 a.m. the next morning of the Messiaen back in New York. So I saw this, and I got in touch with Lou Ranger, and I said, I'm looking at this. Do you remember these days? And we had a exchange about that particular time. So the Carter was a huge thing for the quintet, but just what was happening around us was an amazing thing.
Wow.
So the Carter, we ended up, we played the Carter. We really played the Carter a lot. Played it a lot of places. I dare say it was not particularly popular among audiences. It's a very intellectual piece, very gnarly. It's difficult to play and to listen to for the non-initiated. We played it a lot. I think the other composers I think I would mention, because it was kind of a newer time with the quintet, was when we get sort of toward the end of the 1980s, when we got pieces from Eric Uezen and Dave Sampson. I always tell myself that they're not really connected, except that we happened to get a quintet from each of them at pretty much the same time. They're separate composers with their own styles and their own lives. But we did get a piece from each of them, which we began to play, and I think that's on a disc was called New American Brass, which it was around 1990, 91 that we recorded them. John Rojek had just joined the group, and it was a new time for the quintet. That was the first time that since I had been in the group, where everybody was more or less the same age. I guess Rojak might be 8 or 10 years younger than me, but basically everybody in the late 1980s or early 90s was in their prime. So I think that group, hit its stride. I think we reached a certain style in playing that was our own. I mean, I look back very fondly at those days that the American Brass Quintet, from my years in the quintet, really kind of came into its own. I mean, I don't know if anyone else noticed that, but I certainly did. That we kind of had a way of doing things that really was an individual way of doing it.
Well, I would agree with that. I mean, I was a student at that time, as you remember,
Uh-huh.
because I had a few
Sure.
lessons with you here and there, and and this is an aside too, but I remember in 1995 there was the brass conference in Bloomington.
Oh yeah, sure.
You remember
Mm-hmm.
this?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
And I remember I had a lesson with you during that time, and you guys had played. I remember Chris Gecker played the Awaizen Sonata after you guys had played a quintet recital that morning,
Uh-huh.
which was crazy. But also during that week, I don't know, you'll probably remember this. There was a party at Harvey Phillips Ranch.
I remember it very well.
Okay, so this party, so people are listening, there was all of you guys with Summit Brass were there,
Yep.
right? And it was Arnold Jacobs' 82nd birthday party. So he had birthday cake, and Doc Schitzer was there.
That I don't remember. Wow.
He was
okay.
Doc Schitzer
Yeah.
was there, and it was for people that have never seen Harvey's Ranch. Was just imagine most people. It's literally a ranch house with a silo in the back in Indiana with a cornfield, and I remember where you were. You and Tony Plogue and Alan Dean were and David Hickman, I think, were all at this one table. And I remember there's a picnic table with Jacobs and this cake. And then over on the cornfield, I remember Leonard and Doc Schitzer talking. And I thought, any minute, Herbert Clark and Arbin are going to walk out of that cornfield. Like,
It's good, yeah.
And I remember getting a ride back with John Rommel to campus. And we both kind of looked at each other like, that was really something.
I remember that party very well. I remember, funny that this is what I remember, but I remember that Harvey, as Harvey would do things in sort of a grand style, there was a barbecue pit, and the damn thing must have been 6 feet across. And I remember that the person making the barbecue had this enormous wooden spoon. It must have been about 4 feet long, and he kept, stirring whatever he was cooking. But I had this picture of it in my mind. But I thought only Harvey could sort of, mastermind something on that scale. That really was quite a party. I remember it was great. Yeah.
Yeah, I just thought any minute Kevin Costner is going to whisper somebody famous out of that field.
Really, yeah.
So, but no, that was a great era, and that kind of leads me to my next question and I think you sort of started to answer it. What recordings are you most proud of with the ABQ?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I know the work that I put in for the recording called Fire and Lightning, and also the one called In Gabriele's Day. Those are both essentially Renaissance music recordings. All the editions were mine. A good number of them are published. I didn't ever get around to doing everything, but I put a good amount of it out. But it's got a lot of me is in there, and I know what kind of work that it took. I know the kind of experimentation and rehearsing that we did to get the editions the way they needed to be. I mean, my colleagues were a very patient bunch when I would come in with, a half dozen new pieces saying, well, I'm hoping that this is going to become a suite, but I can replace this piece and let's read it again, try it up a step, do this. We'd have to do a lot of things, and no one ever complained. Maybe privately they complained, but no one ever complained that, geez, can't you do the work at home and have this just be finished when it gets here? It was never like that. So those two recordings are certainly very, very important ones to me. I mentioned the Wazen and Sampson pieces that we did in the late '80s, which are on that New American Brass disc. That at its time was particularly important. We did the kind of, I don't want to say they're sort of unknown, but maybe not as well known as some others. We did several brass band records on 19th century instruments. We did one in 1980, but then we did two after the year 2000. We did with music of the 26th North Carolina Regimental Band that the library was with the Moravian Music Foundation down in Winston-Salem. And those were really a kick. Again, the amount of work that I personally had to put into it. You know, the music was all these old band parts, you know, that were falling apart, and it was band music. So, you know, they're like 4x6, you know, little
Yeah.
cards. And I remember when the project started saying, the woman in charge is a woman named Nola Reed Knaus, she's director of the Arabian Music Foundation. I remember saying, you know, we can't play from that. You've got a bunch of guys here playing instruments that they're not used to playing. We can't be looking at these parts trying to figure out what notes we're supposed to play. We're going to have enough trouble, you know? We have enough to learn. So she and I worked very hard to get all the music into the computer, get it all proofread. Sometimes I even had students proofreading some of it for me, you know, put a group together and let them read a little bit. It was a huge project. But again, you know, I guess you get out of something what you put into it. So those recordings, I certainly are close to my heart in that. Maybe the biggest project, though, for me was the 50th anniversary CD called State of the Art. It's a 2 CD set. I mean, it's got you know, like 18 or 20 brand new pieces, all written for the ABQ. I remember when we were talking about the 50th anniversary, and you know, well, everybody puts out like a retrospective. You know, you put out a recording of something you did in the 60s that was kind of cool, and you put out another thing, and you put it together, and everybody, you know, is excited because this is what you did for 50 years. But I remember I got this idea, and I said, you know, that's what everybody else did, but that's not what we're going to do. We have been bringing out these new pieces year after year after year, and we're going to put out something that is going to talk about now and the future. It's not going to talk about pat ourselves on the back for 50 years of doing a good job. This is going to be, this is where we are at this moment, and this is where we are moving forward. Needless to say, it was an enormous project, a 2 CD set. You know, it's got to be, you know, 110 minutes of music or more on these 2 CDs, all modern pieces written for us.
Yeah.
I did a lot of the, no, I certainly have to give Kevin an awful lot of credit for the editing and things that he did. We did it together where I did a lot of listening and would plot out the pieces in the score.
Mm-hmm.
Kevin did a lot of the technique on the computer in, you know, whatever program he was using then. I can't even remember, but he did a lot of that. Really did all of it.
Right.
Then we'd get together and go over it. Is this what you wanted, Ray? Does this sound right? I did this. I moved this. I did it this way. It was huge. It was a huge amount of stuff. But I have to say, you know, that was, I again, because of the effort and because of what that record was, it really meant a lot to me. And I think people who were interested in the ABQ and followed the ABQ understood that that's what we should have done for the 50th. No sort of look at the past, you know, this is what we should have done. So
absolutely,
that was important to me. I don't know. I pretty much, I also have a fondness for the very last CD I did with the quintet, which was called Snapshot. And the reason is only that as my tenure in the group was sort of winding down, so I left in 2013, but I want to say by even 2010 or 11, I just felt like it was more and more difficult for me to play the way that was acceptable to me in the quintet. I don't think I hope I wasn't playing bad. I don't think I was playing badly. The group was not, you know, nobody was on me about it or anything like that. But, you know, Kevin and I would often, you know, we'd talk all the time, but you know, it was becoming clear to me that, and I would say to Kevin, you know, when the concert is over, all I feel now is I feel relief that I didn't embarrass the group or myself. I just feel good that, you know, that I got through it, but I don't feel successful or satisfied. I just feel relieved, you know. And I realized that's not a good reason to do it. So eventually, I could see the writing on the wall that I was going to be leaving the group. And that recording, I remember because we had a few pieces that we hadn't recorded that group had done. You know, we played a lot. Schaefer Mahoney, Trevor Garekis. There were a few composers. There was a few tidbits of early music, a few suites that I had done that we hadn't recorded. And I remember saying, you know what, let's just push real hard. Let's put this out. It might very well be kind of the end of an era. This might be what we do as a group together. Who knows? But it very well might be. So let's do this. You know, let's get this done. And I'm really glad we did, because I have a soft spot in my heart, I guess, for that one too. You know?
Well, yeah, I think that recording, I remember getting it, and I wasn't aware of it, and I'd gotten it, and I thought, if this is your last recording, you're about the only trumpet player that most people will not realize that's your last recording,
Hmm.
because it sounds just like the stuff you
Well,
did in the 90s. And like a lot of people, when they get a little long in the tooth in the end, you start thinking, well, it's the end of their career.
sure.
Well, and there was nothing on that that's like that. It sounds like I can't tell you and Kevin apart. It sounds just as it should be,
Well,
so
I appreciate you saying that. I always took that as a barometer. If I thought I was keeping up, and Kevin was telling me, you're doing fine, I was in the game. But uh, I mean, different people, off on a little tangent, but different people approach being an older player in different ways.
yeah.
I was one that players I respected gave me that sort of thing, like, better to retire a week early than a year late or something, so, or a year early or 2 years late. And I took that to heart. I felt like I don't want to be that guy. I don't want people to come and hear the group or hear me and sort of, oh, but 20 years ago, it just, I didn't want to be that. So I left the quintet when I suppose I could have stayed. It was also a big tour coming up, and I remember thinking, I got so I didn't enjoy traveling that much. I actually was not a good traveler. I had to sort of, every time I got on a plane, I had to take drugs to be able to handle sitting in a plane. I was
Mm.
claustrophobic, it wasn't comfortable for me. And I remember the quintet was going to be going to Australia. And I remember thinking, well, maybe I can keep it together, and I'll make the trip to Australia, but I don't know, I'm going to fly, 20 hours or whatever it is. I'm going to get off the plane. I'm going to have to be able to play. And the group's got to sound great. We haven't been to Australia since the group went in the '60s. And then I remember saying to myself, so I'm going to be there for 4 or 5 weeks, do all this, and I'm going to come back, and then what? Then I'm going to leave anyway, which that's how I felt. So I said, no, no. The best thing to do is give the group the time to get together with another player and go and be young and vibrant and ready to work. And that was very obvious to me. Frankly,
Wow.
the same thing happened when I left the ballet. My colleagues were very surprised that I decided to leave the ballet when I did. And playing in an orchestra is, uh, in my opinion, is a lot easier as you get older than playing in the quintet. You're just not under the same pressure. You're not, and particularly a job in a pit. You just have a lot more leeway. But there aren't people out in the audience sort of scrutinizing what you're doing. You have a job to do. You've got to play music well, and people are dancing. The music is not the main interest in the theater. And I was doing fine, but I just got to the point that I felt like, I'm not doing this as well as I did. It's not as easy for me to do it, and I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to walk in the pit saying, well, here goes, we'll see how this goes tonight. So I left, I mean, it was
Yeah.
about that simple. It really just became obvious to me that was the right decision to make.
Well, yeah. Well, judging from the snapshot, I don't think anybody thought you were anywhere near the end of the career when you hear that recording.
Well,
So,
thanks,
um,
Mark. That's nice of you to say it. Thank you.
well, of course. And I also want to talk a little bit about working with some of your colleagues. Because I know early you were Lou Ranger,
Yep,
and then with Chris Gecker for so long, and then finally with Kevin. If you could maybe
sure,
talk a little bit about working with those guys and
sure. So Lou had been in the quintet about 3 years when I joined at '73. He was also guitar trained. He came out of Boston. I knew him briefly in Boston, but he was several years older than me. Um, I got real lucky when I joined the quintet that Lou was there. Lou was he wasn't much older, but he was much more mature than me. He understood how the group worked. He understood the other personalities in the group very well. He understood what the group was going through with the departure of Jerry Schwartz, who had been such a strong influence in the group. And those things were so important for me to adjust, to be able to become, working in the group and to do it well. I owe the guy a lot. I just spoke to him recently, and we were talking about that Messiaen thing,
yeah.
and the Carter. And he left the quintet around 1977 or '78, and took the full time job out at University of Victoria in British Columbia. And as is often the case with my quintet colleagues, a lot of times people come in when they're younger and they're single, and touring is exciting, and you see the world and you travel around. It's great, and then guys get older, they get married. If you have a family, suddenly your priorities change a lot. And, seeing that 2 or 3 week tour coming up in your date book and there's two little kids running around the house, you start to feel like, hey, maybe I shouldn't be going out on the road for a couple of weeks. And certainly Lou was starting to raise a family in the 70s. And when that full-time job opened up, it was a really, really good move for him. Tough for me to lose him, but we remained colleagues in Aspen actually for many years after that. And as I said, I saw him last year, and we were together. We communicated recently. When Chris Gecker came in the group, that was I always say I could never tell the difference listening to recordings between me and Chris. And to this day, I listen to pieces that we did that I don't remember, really. And I listen and said, did I play that? Did he play that? I don't know. I thought, in terms of a certain way of approaching music or a blend in playing, I thought Chris and I had a really good partnership, and it was special. It was really a fabulous thing for the group, and for us to have a couple of us that could work together as true trumpeters the way Chris and I did. And I love the guy, and he too got to a point in his life where it just made sense for his family and for himself to take something more secure. Quintet life, as I say, it's not for everybody, and at some point it becomes more difficult. So we were all very sorry to see him leave the quintet when he did, but it was the right decision. And we got, once again, extremely lucky when Chris left and Kevin came to us, and Kevin and I also, maybe in some ways, the strongest relationship I had in the quintet ever is with the relationship I have with Kevin. He was able to come in the group and understand not only how to fit in as the young guy, but how to bring new things to the group and get the group to adopt him, get the group to sort of understand that we have to move forward. We have to be thinking in the new century. We have to have an online presence. We have to do things. I thought that he really, the way he did that, the way he was able to do that with the group was incredible to me. He made me always feel like an equal partner with him. We always felt like, we communicated great, but he always showed a great deal of respect to me as the senior trumpeter, respected my opinions and experience, and that kept me going. I mean, a lot of those projects, I couldn't have done those projects if I didn't have a guy behind me saying, okay, you got it. If you take care of this, I can take care of the rest of it. Just you listen to the piece, see what you think. I mean, I was lucky. I was really lucky,
Oh, yeah. Well, you guys blended so well. I mean, I remember the David Sampson piece you guys did with two trumpets and electronics.
Right, yeah.
Listening to that. I mean, there's so many of those things. And I also remember being on the train with Kevin once coming back from Stony Brook, and he had just listened to your Trumpet in Our Time recording. Oh. And it must have been the day before, and just sort of randomly, he said, boy, that Kenneth Sonata on there is really fantastic, isn't it? I said, yeah, it really is. And he had just, I don't know why he had really gone to that piece, just sort of randomly that week. But I remember him bringing that up and going, that's really great, so. Yeah.
We had a very special relationship. I've often said that, well, when I left the quintet, I know a lot of people said to me, it's going to hit you like a ton of bricks. You're going to wake up one morning and you're going to see your whole life pass before your eyes. You're not going to be able to get out of bed. You're going to be so depressed by that you left,
Yeah.
And it's funny because that never happened. And I've told Kevin this, that really the biggest regret I had was leaving Kevin. Was not having that relationship with them. I mean, I love the guys in the quintet. I love the group. But that relationship was so special. I've always said that was my biggest regret when I left the group, was I wasn't going to work with him all the time. And I meant it. It was really true. It was very special.
Well, they're lucky to have him in Bloomington now. So
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I got a text from him this morning. We're constantly in touch because he's juggling a lot of stuff right now.
Yeah.
He's got a lot of things going, and of course, for all of us with COVID, we're doing this all the time. We're on the computer all day long. And we're trying to, make the semester effective for students, trying to make it valuable. A lot of unknowns. Who knows, what's going to happen 2 months from now. So he's certainly, in a new job, in a new community, but stuck in his home. It's got to be tough. He's got a lot on his plate.
Yeah, but I had a few more things. I want to talk a little bit about some of the other groups you played in. We mentioned Summit Brass earlier, and of course, you and Chris did so much in Orpheus. You know,
Yep. Mm-hmm.
the Pulcinella recording, that is you, right?
Yes, it is. Yeah. Yeah.
If you don't have the Orpheus Pulcinella, you're missing out.
Oh,
That is
you.
that is fantastic Pulcinella suite. But again, it's hard to tell who's playing what between you and Chris on some of those recordings, because there's the Copeland recording with Quiet City that I know is you because it says so.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's also I think is it the Latin American Symphony or the Chamber Symphony?
I'm on that. Yeah. The Latin American three
sketches maybe.
Three sketches. Yeah. Yeah. I remember doing that. Yeah. It's on the same. One of the versions of Quiet City has that on it, along with the short symphony, which I also played on. We played that piece a lot on the road with Orpheus.
Yeah.
But that was, yeah, go ahead, please.
And a lot of people don't know, that might not know Orpheus, but there's no conductor.
That was the big, thing when we started Orpheus, which is sort of the late 70s, although at first it was really, they weren't doing, chamber orchestra really. They were doing sort of string pieces, that sort of thing. But that was the claim to fame, so to speak.
Right.
It was a bunch of really fine New York players who got together and formed basically a cooperative. So pieces were done with, there would be kind of elected representatives around the orchestra who would be the core group, who would get together and rehearse the piece, just those players, and kind of come up with concept of music, how they wanted to do it, and then that would translate into the larger ensemble. We'd go ahead and then have full rehearsals. It was a fabulous experience and a fabulous group. I have to say, if you want to talk about efficiency, that was not a group that was efficient. We rehearsed a lot, and you would think that someone wasn't going to be able to breathe again unless that eighth note was longer, or I mean the musical decisions, arguments, and sort of passionate pleas for something to be done a musical certain way. It was astounding to me. I mean, I never objected to it, but I remember thinking sometimes, geez, we're arguing about this quarter note, and I don't think we've played the last movement yet. I mean, it's so it was. But what an experiment! And obviously, they're still playing, and they are, play all over the world. I had a lot of really, great times out on the road with Orpheus. It was a great group. It was really, really fun to do. I stopped doing it. I don't know, even in the early 2000s, I think I had stopped. Eventually, for me, when after we had kids, so my kids were born in 1995 and 1997, I started to see that there were things I didn't want to do anymore. I didn't want to commute to North Carolina School of the Arts, which I did for 24 years. I didn't want to do it anymore. I didn't want to get up in the morning and leave my family and, fly somewhere. I basically stopped doing Summit Brass by the early 2000s because I decided the only touring I was going to do was with the American Brass Quintet. So I didn't go out on the road with Orpheus anymore. I didn't go out with Summit Brass. I just started to limit what I was doing because I thought, I need to be with my family. I need to be a dad. And so that, I was kind of out of the loop with Orpheus by then. That Pulcinella. So this was very typical Orpheus. So we're in the studio, we're going to record Pulcinella, and they must have done that first movement, that overture, prelude movement, whatever it is. They must have done it 20 times. I mean, they played it over and over and over. And every time they stop, and someone would say, well, in that one measure, I don't think that note is exactly okay, let's do it again. So they're going on and on. I remember it like it was yesterday. And so finally, we get to the last movement. We play the last movement from beginning to end, and the concertmaster stands up and says, okay, we got it. And I remember speaking up, and I said, now wait just a minute. I think we got it too. I think it's all there. But I want one more of the ending just to make sure. I don't want to find out later that it wasn't as good as I thought it was going to be. And of course, we'll do it. But I remember thinking, they killed all this time in the beginning of the piece. And, and when it came, everything worked out fine. I have no regrets or anything, but it was the way, a lot of times it felt like that with Orpheus. It was the way they sort of managed time.
Well, string players can do that. And
I didn't want to say that, but
we can say that because we know none of them are watching.
Perfect. That's perfect. Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
did you, and with that Pulcinella, what did you play the last movement on? You remember?
I played my E3L. I played. I liked in my career with something with a lot of high C's in it. That was my go-to trumpet. I
Yeah.
mean, not I didn't always play that trumpet for that, but that if I had to play like a part like that
Mhm.
I felt confident on that trumpet.
Was it on the
My
D side?
I played the toccata on the D side, and I would change somewhere along the way. I would change to the E flat trumpet because I liked the way it worked at the end of the piece. I felt confident with it. When we did it at the New York toward the end of my career at the ballet, I remember Pulcinella came up, and I remember thinking, oh my God, I've played this piece. I played it many. Orpheus toured that piece all the time, so I played it so many times, and I thought, you know, I wonder if I can still play Pulcinella the way I did then. And actually, for the performances at the New York City Ballet, I played the end on the G trumpet because I could get it every time and not feel like, I'm going to have trouble or I'm, God forbid, you kind of clam the last note. It would be, you didn't want to do that. So, but I remember I had to switch and play on the G and it was fine. But I remember saying, well, this is intelligent. I'm going to
Yeah.
let myself do this. This is smart because I need to do this for this piece.
Right. That's one of those pieces you don't want to end it on the
On the
seventh.
seventh, yeah, you don't want to do that. Yeah.
And I wanted to, and kind of switching to your practicing and your the teaching. Can you? I mean, a lot of people know about this, but maybe some don't. Can you talk about your famous 10-week practice guide and sort of how that develops?
I'd be happy to, yeah. And you referring to it as famous, I think about it and say, really? I mean,
A lot. You made a lot of money for Kinko's, I think, in the 90s.
Perfect. I'm happy to hear that. Well, the way that came about, this was really in the early 80s, I think. I had been at the School of the Arts, North Carolina, as the teacher for a few years. And the trend I noticed with my students, first of all, in those days, students didn't go to summer music festivals. They went home, they worked a job, they practiced, they came back to school. And the trend I noticed so frequently was when a student would come back in September, the things that they were already good at were better, and the things that they couldn't do at all were worse. And and I kept seeing this. So I thought to myself, I've got to have something to give them, the 1st of June that will more or less take them through the summer that they can really use to stay focused and kind of, have a good sense of what to do. So I devised this 10-week practice routine, which for a while I think a lot of people had had simply the spreadsheet. They
Mm-hmm.
didn't have the 3 paragraphs. And I know people would say to me, well, I have your 10-week practice. I spend an hour and 15 minutes a day on it. And I would say, well, wait, you don't actually have it. You have a maintenance part of my practice routine, which is a spreadsheet, but that's only supposed to take you 20 minutes. That's an informational part of your practice where when you're done with that 20 minutes, then your practice really starts, where you start to really bear down on things that are weaknesses or things that you discover in the maintenance part of your practice that you need to spend more time on.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have other practice later of repertoire or other things to do. So I know for a while I was concerned that I believed in that 10-week practice routine, but people had an incomplete version and used it improperly. So that's how it came about. And I still to this day reiterate to people that the maintenance is just that. It's sort of, I often liken it to an athlete and say it's kind of like a professional athlete in the off season, maybe going down into their basement on an off day and sort of do a little this, a little of that. Does anything hurt? Nothing strenuous. Is it working properly? And then later in the day, they're in the weight room, or they're running 5 miles, or they're out on the court. Whatever it is. But that maintenance is kind of like a checklist. It's kind of like to see how things are working and what needs special attention. So that was all. That was the goal of that 10-week practice routine.
Now, was that something you did in your own practice, or was it sort of more?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well,
Yeah.
no. When I put that together, oh yeah, I spent a lot of time just deciding what material really addressed certain playing things for me. Now, clearly, it was material I knew. So the books that are in that routine are books that I had played out of a lot. And again, it's meant as a practice routine. So it's not exploring new material. It's reviewing material you know. in a lot of cases with my students, they get into it and they realize they don't know that material as well as I did. And I say to them, let's sit down and devise a maintenance routine for you based on the material that you're more familiar with. And I think that's a good route to go. I think I think then they can have something that's just more useful for them.
Yeah, yeah, because people aren't familiar with that. There's Schlossberg, Goldman, Arbin, Clark. Trying to remember what
Schubrück,
else. Schubrück.
Schubrück. There's a touch of Nagel speed studies.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty much it. That's getting close to all of it.
Yeah, yeah. There's so much good stuff, and we want to talk about your teaching more. I mean, like you mentioned before, you were at the North Carolina School of the Arts, of course, Aspen in the summer, Juilliard. Did I miss anything?
Well, yeah.
Manhattan.
So yeah, I was at Manhattan before I was at Juilliard. I was at the Manhattan School for probably 6 or 7 years. I did Hart College in the 1980s for several years. Did Brooklyn College. I did a couple of years up at SUNY Purchase. I've gotten around, but you hit the big ones, I guess. You hit the primary ones where I spent the most time.
And like you were saying before, I mean, I was kind of surprised to hear you weren't liking to fly, because you must have flown to Winston-Salem, North Carolina so often in the 80s and early 90s.
Well, yeah. I mean, I started in, I think, 77, and I would make generally like, 21 to 24 trips a year. It was something like that every year. I rarely stayed overnight. It was almost always fly down in the morning, teach all day, fly home at night. But if I did 24 years and I did 20 trips a year, what is that? 480 trips right there. So yeah, it was a lot.
Yeah,
I accumulated a lot of mileage plus miles and had that status, premium status.
that was the first time I met you. Actually, I picked you up at the airport.
Is that right?
Yeah, yeah.
I don't remember it. Yeah.
Well, no, I was in school there in North Carolina for a little bit at Appalachian State, and then I drove over to and she said, "When you give me a ride?" And I thought, "Yeah, sure, that'd be great."
Well, that's what I would do. Is I would frequently, I mean, all the time, I'd sort of get a student and say, "You doing anything? You run me over to the airport?" And it was kind of a common way of going back and forth. So.
Oh, I remember vacuuming out my geoprism like this was, So we're talking about teaching. So and this is an interesting time to talk about this. What advice do you have for students going into music now? Because I think so much of the dynamics have changed. It's not always a straight shot into an orchestra that people are looking for, say they were 20 years ago, or that they were imagining. And the technology has improved so much, and there's some skill sets probably that you need that you didn't 30 years ago.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. The requirements of being a professional trumpet player have changed a lot over the years, and now I'm talking about full-time employment, like being in an orchestra. Orchestras, when I was a student, there were no Star Wars, there was no Pops concerts to play, West Side Story and stuff, and it was really strictly a classical music job. Over the years, that's changed a lot, and a lot of orchestras, some of the big orchestras, when they do those performances, they'll job it out. They'll bring in a lead player or bring in a specialist, to do that. But most orchestras can't afford that. Most orchestras are going to put their first trumpet on that and say, we're doing West Side Story. You got to do it. So I think that certainly I say to players that you need to be a more well-rounded player now, even if you're going into an orchestra, than you might have had to been 40 years ago. But the other part of it too is that orchestras kind of have their ups and downs, and I think right now, we've got to look at orchestras with the idea that what's going to happen in January or February? Are orchestras going to sort of come right back online like it never happened? Like, oh yeah, we didn't have concerts for a year, but we're straight. We got our budget together. We're going to start having concerts. We're going to have a full house. Audiences are going to be. It's probably not going to go that way. And I think that where that will lead, let's hope that we're going to get back to having the same kind of vitality in orchestral life that we've had, for the last 50 years or so in this country. But we might not. It might be a time. So I think that in addition to these additional skill sets that we need just for playing an orchestra, I think young players need to be entrepreneurs. They need to be thinking about, well, how am I going to supplement what I do? If the orchestra suddenly takes a 20% pay cut or 20% cut in the length of the season, am I prepared to do other things? Am I a teacher? Can I teach? I think I think when I was a kid, a teacher was often, if you were a player, it meant you were a teacher. Well, that's not really that's not really a good way to look at it. I mean, the fact that you can play well, I don't think entitles you to feeling that you're a necessarily a worthy teacher or have the skill set of a teacher. So I think I encourage all my kids, get out, get some students, learn how to teach, learn how to play in a quintet, learn other things. It will only contribute to what you're going to do in the field. So that's certainly my advice to young players right now, and again, even more so with the pandemic and with the crisis that we're in the midst of.
Right, right. I had a question. If you would give your 20-year-old self advice, if you could, what would that be?
Yeah. So my own advice to myself, and I was able to give this advice to myself over time, but I didn't, at 20, I didn't quite, it hadn't quite materialized. And I remember, so the advice would be, that you've got to be true to yourself. You've got to find your own path. And I think many musicians are, young musicians look at someone else as a model and say, well, that's because they're happy doing what they do. That's what's going to make me happy. That's what I should aspire to be. They don't necessarily take a good look at themselves and what they might want or what they might, aspire to do. Instead, they look to someone else and try to model themselves. So what happened to me, the realization I had, and I was probably around 21. I think it might have been the beginning of my senior year of college, something like that. There was an opening for first trumpet in Toluca, Mexico. Actually, Jim Thompson who had been at NEC, had been first trumpet briefly in Toluca, but then he got Phoenix. So he was leaving Toluca, and of course we all knew it because he had been an NEC student. So I remember another student, coming up to me, sort of very excited, like, "Hey, Toluca just opened up first trumpet. You're going to go down and audition, aren't you?" And I remember, I thought just for a second. I said, "Why would I do that?" He said, "Well, it's a job. I mean, you got to get a job. You have to go out and get a job." I said, "Well, yeah, but I don't really see myself moving to Mexico to play in the symphony." And he was like, "Well, what are you going to do? You're going to graduate. What are you going to do?" And I said, "Well, I've been freelancing around Boston. I'm going to stay here. I'm playing some early music things. I'm playing with some people. I played with the Boston Opera a little bit. I'll play club dates." I said, "I'll make a go of it. I'll find my way, but I'm going to find my way. I don't want to go to Mexico to be in an orchestra. I don't know anyone there." It's like, but I remember when I said it, as I was saying it, thinking, how come I don't want to go there when everybody else is going to go take the audition? How come I'm not going? And I remember sort of, having a little talk with myself about, well, I seem to know what I want. It doesn't seem to be what the norm is for people coming out of this school. They seem to be very set on, this is what you do. It's one step to the next, and this is, well, if I were to look back, I think that was something that I guess I wish that I'd done it sooner. I mean, it didn't prevent me from getting where I got to, but I think that I would say that to a young player, besides myself, I would say, find your way. Find your own way and figure out what you want to do. And it doesn't mean that you can achieve that straight ahead. You can't get from point A to point B necessarily in a straight line, but you can start to make decisions that matter. Yeah. I know that when I was a young player in New York, I kind of did everything that I could do. As a freelancer, you find that you kind of just say yes. The phone rings, you say yes. But I started to realize there were some things that were more interesting to me than others. And on occasion, I would turn down things that maybe another player would have said, "My God, you didn't go after that. You didn't want," and I would, it was more important to me to do this because this is, I remember some things coming along later in life when I was in the quintet, and a couple of opportunities that I think some players would have been, "Oh my God, you didn't do that. You didn't go play that orchestra." And to me, it was like, yeah, but my job is with the quintet and my responsibility is the quintet. I'm not going anywhere. That's what I signed up for. I'm going to do that. I had the same experience with the New York City Ballet one year um, I guess it was around 1990. I had the opportunity to play the third chair at the New York Philharmonic for a while, and
Hmm.
Phil and I were good friends, and we worked together a lot. And Phil offered me a season. He said, we're not going to fill this vacancy for a while. How about you do the whole season? And I took a look at it, and I said, I'd love to do it. It'd be great, but I really can't. I really can't just turn down my other work and things. I have a responsibility. And his response was to say, well, take the calendar and tell me the weeks that you want to do, and I'll job out the other weeks. But if you can be here, I just as soon have you here than have to job it out. And that was great. That was, to me, that was like, well, now this is fantastic. But I remember I went right over to my manager at the ballet, and I said, I want you to know that you might hear about this, that that I'm going to do some work over there, but I'm telling you right up front, um, my priority is here. This is my job. I'm first trumpet at the New York City Ballet, and I intend to do this job as it needs to be done. Now, I'm not going to automatically take weeks off here to be over there. There may be a few weeks somewhere, but before I say yes to them, I'm going to check with you. If you think that maybe I could be off that week, maybe the repertoire isn't so demanding and you could do without me, that would be great. I'd really appreciate that. But if you tell me you need me that week, I'm here, and I no questions asked. I'm not going to plead with you or anything. I'm here. This is my job. Um, to me, that was, it's the right way to do your job.
Yeah.
That was the right thing. So, anyway, it's a long answer, but again, to me, that you find your own way. You decide what's important to you, what matters, and that's how you go about what your business. That's how you do it.
Well, that's such important advice. I know a lot of students at Juilliard would always talk about how they had their talk with you toward the end of their time. I know Kevin talked to me about that, and and it was impactful even to me to talk to him about those same things. To not feel like if you didn't do X, Y, or Z like everybody else, you're still doing it. You're just doing it your way, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
I certainly always believed it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Always believed that.
And last little question here. Well, not really a question. I
Yeah.
just wanted to point out to people
Ah.
this book
Mhm.
and this. Now, I think people have known about this book for a little while. You want to talk about this one first a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. So that book's been out for I don't know 5 or 8 years. I can't even quite remember. But the way
Right.
it came about was Dave Sampson and I were kind of working on a project together. Some etudes that he put out, which eventually were published as notes from faraway places.
Right.
And I was kind of helping him with them. I was playing some of them, and we had this idea that maybe I would come up with some sort of preliminary studies for some of the etudes. So I started to work on them. I came up with some things, and one thing led to another. He showed them to Jean Pierre, and Jean Pierre was a little bit lukewarm to the idea. He said, I like the etudes, but I'm not sure that the studies work with the etudes. And I said to Dave, look, get your etudes published. I put some time in, but don't worry about it. I don't care. I wanted to do it, and just remove the studies from your etudes. Well, then it was a few years later, out of the blue, Jean Pierre sends me an email. He says, hey, I found these studies of yours. I've been playing them. And what's the story on this? They're sitting around. Did you ever do anything with them? How come I have them even? We didn't even know. And I said, well, this is what we did. And so that's why you have them, because you looked at them. But I never did anything with them. And he said, well, do you want to give it a little thought? Maybe do a little bit more work on it. Do something that you think is relatively complete. So I did. I sat down and my goal was to try to come up with something a little different. I mean, I'd like to think that some of the slurring things I offered are different than some other books.
Mm-hmm.
I think some of the valve things are quite different than Clark or another book. Every part of the book, I guess there's like 4 or 5 parts in the book, and it's brief, but every part of it, I feel like I tried to address something that maybe I didn't feel was addressed as carefully in other materials. So that's how it came about, and frankly, I don't really even know how many he sold or anything. I mean, every now and then I think I get a royalty check, but I don't pay attention really. So, but I think some people have had some good success with it.
Oh no, it's obviously a great book and very well conceived, and this one is a little bit newer, I believe, right?
That came out last March. Yeah,
That's yeah.
and funny. So, I played all those early music things for 45 years, and so I researched a lot of early music. I kept finding two-part music, which I would kind of put in a folder in a drawer, and I found some, and some of them are on some of our recordings. Some of the
Right.
on Fire and Lightning, there's several two-part pieces, not even just for trumpets. There's a couple for trombone and horn, or two trombones. So I had really a lot of two-part pieces sort of collected, and I remember it was a year ago in the fall. I brought a few in. I was sort of fooling with them with a student, and I said, "Yeah, no, this is really good. Let's read this." So we read it, and this is a wonderful student who's still my student. From Arkansas. Ben Keating is his name. He's actually our TA this year at Juilliard. So we were reading them, and he said, "Well, what are you doing with these? It's like you've edited them out, but what are you going to do?" I said, "Oh, I had them forever, and I don't know. I'm not going to do anything. It's just someday." And he said, "You should get this done. You should just put them into a book and get it done. You've got everything you need." But it was funny because I was kind of like, "Yeah, okay." And then after the lesson, I thought to myself, I said, this is my student, my 19, 20-year-old student is telling me I got to get some work done. I should get it done. I should just get the damn thing done. So I sat down and I figured out which ones I thought I liked the best, which ones were the most interesting. And I guess there's like 25 in the book. And, I made myself do it. I made myself put it together, and it came out in March. And so far, so good. We got it out there.
I think it's fantastic. I mean, if people don't know it, I'll hold it up again. And it's a great book because this is also the kind of book that if you have students doing a recital together or something like that, you could easily put together a suite of this music. And
I think you're absolutely right. There's some really, I didn't compose any of them. Some of the pieces are wonderful. It's not my doing. It was the composer, and there's some really, really unusual two-part music in there. I think that works real well.
Yeah. I mean, it's really fantastic. And someday I hopefully get together with another trumpet player and be able to play them in a room without mask and bell covers.
Nice. Me too.
So anyway, do you have any plans for any future projects? I mean, before we came onto Facebook, I know we were talking a little bit about what you're doing right now, which is
So I'm a full-time trumpet teacher at the Juilliard School, but in addition to that, I'm chair of the brass department, which I've done it's getting close to 30 years. But it's an interesting time for schools, and I find right now that if I am doing a project, it's like figuring out what we're doing in classes, taking care of the students, make sure that they're on Zoom when they're supposed to be, or make sure they're getting the education that they certainly deserve to get. So I think right now I'm pretty, I wouldn't say I'm overwhelmed with my job at Juilliard, but I'm very focused on it. I'm spending a lot of time every day trying to be as good as a brass chair as I can be, and as good a trumpet teacher as I can be. So that's on my radar. I mean, as far as real other projects, I started to about 2 years ago or 3 years ago. I was with the quintet guys, and I said, okay, our music, our library is like all over the place. I have boxes in my basement of quintet music that some of them, now that I've been looking, one of the boxes had not been opened since before I was in the ABQ. It was given to me as a sealed box of music, and I never had opened it. Because when I did, I found some things that I said, that's where this was all these years, a score to that piece. But anyway, I said to the guys, I have some time. I want to start collecting some pieces that the group is not currently playing, and I want to have the score in parts and put it in envelopes and seal the envelopes up so that they're in one place. And if anything happens, or who knows where we're going to be 5, 8 years from now, this music can continue to exist. It's still around. So I want to say I did at least sort of 30 or 40 pieces so far. I started to do another set of pieces right before the pandemic, and it was funny because I got a couple of the guys brought me the parts. Eric Reed, the horn player, about 2 weeks ago, he texted me and he said, "Hey, I'm coming out to your town to do something. Can I stop by? I won't even get out of the car. I just want to give you the music that you're looking for." So I stopped by and I got the horn parts. So I don't know exactly where that's going to go. Whether it's going to be, whether I'm literally going to put the whole library together. But there were certainly some pieces that I thought, they're not going to exist anywhere else unless we keep them and we preserve them. And I'm going to make sure that happens. I'm going to make sure that I take care of that.
Yeah.
You know,
Well,
there's a question in the chat, and I haven't
oh,
looked at the question, but if you want to look at it, let's.
I think,
I
oh, okay. This is from Eric Hegman, and would love to hear about your routines
mhm.
uh, or suggestions for players without a current teacher. He's asking me how you came up with how it evolved. So
Yeah.
he said it
So
helped him a lot in grad school. So that was
good.
the,
I'm glad that it did because we certainly covered it. I hope well enough for Eric. Eric, if not, let me know. But it sounds like I think we spent some time on it.
and I want to see if there were any questions. I just kind of briefly glanced at Facebook. There are definitely a lot of people that saying hi, that I'm sure you know.
Nice.
So many, I don't want to leave anybody out, but there's a lot of people. And, I certainly appreciate you doing this. And if there's anything else you want to talk about, you can certainly do that.
We covered a lot. I
We
mean,
covered a lot of material.
you got my whole life. I mean, you got as much as I have to give. So, and look, here's
Oh,
some
here you
more
go.
back.
Could you tell us about the avatar?
Avatar, sure. So, the Avatar, boy, when is that? Early '90s piece that Steve Rouse wrote. I want to say Steve Rouse was at Louisville, and I think the first performance was. Boy, I can't quite remember, but the teacher there, I can't quite get his name at the moment.
With Leon Rapier.
No, it was
Mike
after
Tunnel?
Leon.
Mike Tunnel.
It's Tunnel. It was Tunnel. Yeah, Tunnel
Yep.
did it. And a contemporary music group that I played in New York was always looking for, for new repertoire and often solo repertoire. And over the years, I did Volpe pieces and some other things with them. But they found this piece. They found Avatar and brought it to my attention, and I performed it on a concert. And around that time, I was starting to think, well, if I'm going to ever do a solo CD, I better get it done. And, you didn't want to have it be many years later and say, I should have done that. But it was the early '90s, and I decided I've got some repertoire, I've got some things that haven't been recorded, and so I went ahead and got the Avatar done. I think it's a really cool trumpet piece. It's a really fine piece. One of my students did it. Clint McClendon did it on his recital. Clint's from the Atlanta area.
Right.
He did it on his senior recital this past year and did a great job. But I was excited that he kind of embraced the piece that way because it's a really, really nice trumpet piece. Harder than hell, I'm afraid, but I'm glad that when I did perform it, it was the only piece I had to play on that concert because I'm not sure that it's Clint did it with a whole full recital. I mean, he managed, but I'm not sure I would have managed very well playing on a whole recital. But yeah, it's a really nice piece. People should certainly know about it.
Let's see. What location should a student start? What location should a student start wanting to perform? Move to? Is that the question of you got to be in a scene to be in a scene?
Well, I mean, I suppose I think what's important for a student is to be around people, like-minded people. I think if you're going to be a performer, you need to be around performers. It doesn't mean you have to be in New York or Los Angeles. I mean, you could certainly be at a university somewhere where people are serious about music, but I think you learn from those people. And if you're going to be a performer and you're going to a school where you're the only performance major, I think you're probably making a mistake. You just want to be around people that have the same goals in life that you have and are working the same way toward those goals. So I don't think you have to worry about whether it's a big city or not exactly. I think it's the people you're around. Maybe if you're thinking about, well, I'd like to get work, I'm done with school and I want to find work. Well, there are cities that have more work. And New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Houston, whatever, these are cities that have, a freelance scene and people can maybe get some work if they're willing to sort of be there for a while, get to know people and get their work known to people. There's work to do, so that's maybe the time that the location matters more than the studying part.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been so nice to finally talk to you after I haven't seen you for a couple of years, and it's always a pleasure. And
very nice for me too, Mark. Thank you very much for having me. I really I enjoyed dredging up things in my memory from the old days and talking about some things that I did that I don't often think about all the time. So it's been a lot of fun for me too. Thank you.
It's been great. And hang on just one second after I sign us off of Facebook and hit the stop record button here. Mm-hmm. But thank you.